Hey everybody, this is John for Pioneer Nexus MTG, coming at you with another deep dive deck look at, this one with Gyruda combo in Pioneer. As a friendly reminder, if you do like Pioneer content, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving it a thumbs up, and leaving a constructive comment down below. So this deck recently popped up as a 5-0 under Hayden Otterhoff, and I believe Connerman also might have done some work on the deck. This is a deck that is very powerful in terms of what it does. It is, before the companion tax, this was a consistent turn 4 combo deck that required usually counter spells to interact with. Before the companion tax, what you would do is you'd play some of your ramp, either Paradise, Druid, Sylvan Caryatid, Wolfwillow Haven, maybe copy it or play a second copy, and then cast this out of your companion zone on turn 4, flipping over a bunch of stuff, hoping to put a bunch of copies of Gyruda into play, and then killing your opponent with Dragonlord Kologhan. Way this does this is that whenever it comes into play, it mills the top 4 cards of each player's library, and then puts a creature card from even mana value from among the milled cards onto the battlefield. The way you get around the legendary effect, despite playing all these clones, is Spark Double, which enters as a copy that's non-legendary with a +1/+1 counter on it. And then Whisper Silk Angel allows you to blink Gyruda and continue on your way. And then each subsequent clone that you hit after that, you either copy Spark Double or Weaver Angel until you get to the point where you have an unstoppable board. Hope to hit a Kologhan and then kill your opponent from there. Thought Knot Seer gives you a little bit of disruption, especially when you combine with the other 3 in the sideboard and the post-board games. And then basically you're milling to hit your clone effects, and then you're trying to create this unstoppable board that stops your opponent from killing you, and then you swing in the next turn even if you don't hit a Kologhan. Now there is a certain chance that you can brick. Maybe you'll hit a bunch of lands, maybe you'll hit a Paradise, Druid, or a Wolfwillow Haven. You can also grab stuff off your opponent's deck during the mill process if that should happen. But with all these copies of the various different clones, it's very unlikely that you're going to miss too many times. And then once you get rolling, oftentimes when you untap the following turn, even if you don't hit a Kologhan, you're going to win. Other mill effects you hit is Vizier of Many Faces, which this allows you to embalm it the following turn and potentially get the process going again. Undercover Operative comes in with a shield counter on it, which can be important. Clever Impersonator can copy a creature or planeswalker, or any non-land permanent, which means you can also copy Wolfwillow Haven. And then, Spark Double we've already kind of talked about. As far as the early turns of the setup of this deck, oftentimes this is now a turn 5 deck if you do not have a Gyruda from your deck in your hand, because you have to take a turn off in order to put the Gyruda in your hand. But what you'll seek to do is use one of your 2 mana ramp spells on turn 2, and then either copy it or play another one on 3, and then turn 4 hope to go off with Gyruda. Somewhere in there, if you don't happen to have drawn one of your 3 copies of Gyruda, you have to take a turn off to put it in your hand. So oftentimes this can come down as a turn 5 combo, unless you happen to draw one of your 3 main deck copies. Wolfwillow Haven obviously has its advantages with it being on land. Not a lot of stuff interacts with lands in the format. Sylvan Caryatid can be very difficult to interact with. And then Paradise Druid, you choose when to make this vulnerable. Obviously Caryatid is the best in terms of if you're copying it with a clone, because oftentimes you can go Gyruda on, or Sylvan Caryatid on 2, clone it on 3, and then cast Gyruda on 4. So theoretically this is a turn 4 to turn 5 combo deck. Now this deck does not have a ton of counter or a ton of decisions to make with it, other than whenever you're doing the combo mill. Beyond that, you do get to play a bunch of utility stuff in your lands. Most anti-graveyard stuff does not stop this because of the way Gyruda is templated. Only Grafdigger's Cage actually stops the process from happening, which is kind of crazy, but Leyline of the Void, Rest in Peace, all these other graveyard hate pieces, they don't have a chance to interact. So your Unlicensed Hearse, all these different cards cannot interact with this combo. Only Grafdigger's Cage. Now that said, the way this deck tended to struggle before was counter spells, particularly even something like Mystical Dispute. I don't even know if Mystical Dispute was legal when Gyruda was a thing, but any type of counter spell, Censor, any type of counter spell, turn 3, turn 4, would mess with what this deck does. It's one of the few things that keep us down, or just killing your opponent by turn 4. This was a deck that was popular when Combo Summer was a thing, when Inverter was a deck, when Heliod Ballista combo was a thing. This was another one of those decks that it was a turn 4 combo deck, and back when Lotus Field had Underworld Breach to it. So there was it's a lot different meta than the last time this deck popped up. Now, with the banning of Winota, is this deck finally playable enough? I don't know. It got a 5-0. You'd have to try it out for yourself. As far as the sideboard stuff, now with having the companion tax on it, you are a little bit vulnerable to discard spells during that 1 key turn. So Leyline of Sanctity helps protect you from discard spells and against burn spells and stuff. Thought Knot Seer is disruption against any type of disruption you might expect from your opponent, whether it be counter spells and stuff. You can check their hand the turn before you go off. Arasta, I'm guessing this is primarily when you bring in against a deck casting a bunch of spells. Skylasher, pretty decent against the mono blue Spirits deck. Negate when you need a little bit of counterplay against your opponent's stuff. Obviously this isn't the best, as you have to get to 8 mana before you can hold up a negate, but it is the cheapest counterspell you can realistically play. Destiny Spinner. This makes your creatures and enchantment spells you control uncounterable. This gives you more counterplay against counterspells, and then you find a cursed idol just as a random catch-all against any type of artifact or enchantment we might run into, particularly copies of Grafdigger's Cage. Though it doesn't see a ton of play, if this deck does start popping up, that's something you can expect. As I've said before, this deck doesn't have a ton of decisions to it. A lot of it is, do you want to move some of your Thought Knot Seers to the main deck? Do you want to shave on some amount of your clone effects? Which of the worst clone effects like Undercover Operative and Clever Impersonator do you want to play? Basically, the rest of the deck is just built around playing that powerful thing. Now, alternatively, I played this deck a lot when it was a thing before it got companion taxed out of the format. And there were a lot of games where you'd have to get Caryatids and Paradise Druids and start casting your Whisper Silk Angels and try to beat down and make this point where your opponent countered your Gyruda, but then you have to go with this weird backup plan where you're Thought Knot Searing them, Whisper Silk Angeling them to death, because a lot of times your opponent would mulligan to Aggressive Hate, maybe a Thought Seize or something, and take your Mana Dork. And then you get to the point where it's here you are, you're dead. So obviously aggressive decks can get under this a little bit. Mono red, the various different Greasefang combo decks and stuff can potentially go faster than this. Mono green has a very similar, turn 5-ish go off. Lotus Field obviously has a turn 4, turn 5 go off. So this deck isn't overpowered for the format, but it is certainly something you should be aware of, especially now that people are reintroduced to the fact that it's potentially a viable deck. You might be seeing this deck pop up. Another thing this deck did gain is the Besagus and Nanawaros. This kind of gives you some ways to check some of the stuff your opponent has. You also have 4 copies of Blast Zone in your mana base, not only to be able to cast your Thought Knot Seers in the post-board games, but also gives you an out to any type of hate card your opponent might bring in. I can't think of any in particular off the top of my head. As I said, this deck isn't. This deck is not on most people's radars yet, but I did figure it was a good deck to point out. But there are flex slots in the sideboard. There's plenty of room for innovation as far as what sideboard slots you want, how you want to fight against counterspell decks and stuff. But in terms of the main deck's pretty tight as to what the deck's trying to do. So I figured I'd give you guys a heads up that this deck might be back on the menu, and hopefully this gives you enough of a deep deck dive to know what the heck you're up against. So this has been John, Pioneer Nexus MTG. Hope to see you for the next video.